Hi, 7th graders. This is Miss Bachrach, and here is our review for the biology final, which is coming up on Tuesday, June 10th. So over these past few months, we've been learning biology, which is the study of living things. And in the beginning of the semester, we brainstormed and we thought about what makes something living, what makes something alive, and we created a whole list of the different characteristics that all living things share. So from tomatoes to paramecium to bacteria to flowers, all of these organisms share something in common, as diverse as they are. All organisms grow, reproduce, die eventually, need energy, they take in nutrients. So all organisms, they get food in different ways, but they all do get food somehow. They produce waste, and most importantly, our defining characteristic is that all living things are composed of one or more cells, and this is part of cell theory. So every single organism, whether it's microscopic or whether it's big, like a cow, is made of cells, one or more. Organisms can be classified into 3 different domains. So we mentioned this very, very briefly, and I'm going to review it now. Organisms can be classified into either the bacteria domain, archaea, or eukaryota. Now, bacteria and archaea are prokaryotes, which means they are organisms whose cells have no nucleus. Archaea is just a type of bacteria that lives in extreme conditions, but we spent most of our time on the domain eukaryota. Most of the organisms we learned about were eukaryotes, and eukaryote cells have a nucleus. So animals, plants, fungi, protists, all of these organism cells contain nuclei. Once we are in the eukaryotic domain, this domain can then be classified further. So the great scientist Linnaeus set up a 7-layer classification system. He developed this system to classify organisms into groups according to their structure, allowing scientists to name and communicate about these organisms. So he was a big pioneer in the field of taxonomy, which is the science of classifying living things. To classify, by the way, means to group according to certain characteristics. So as we're going to go through, we're going to see that animals who are classified together share certain characteristics. So at the top level, we have the kingdom. So all eukaryotes, all organisms that have a nucleus, can be divided into different kingdoms, and there are many, many kingdoms. We've discussed that scientists don't necessarily agree about how many kingdoms there are, and we've mainly gone through the animal kingdom, the plant kingdom, and the fungi kingdom. So at the top, we have our kingdom, and a kingdom has the most organisms, the most variety of organisms. So the animal kingdom, as we see in the illustration, it will contain sea stars, snakes, fish, bears, wow bugs. There are many, many different animals. The animal kingdom is then further classified into 9 main different phyla. So in this case, a bear is in phylum Chordata, which is any animal that has a backbone. Humans are also in phylum Chordata. Each phylum can then be further divided into classes. So we have here our bear again in class Mammalia, which humans are also in. Humans are also mammals. So, and then mammals can be further classified, and then it takes us to order. Then we go further down. The order can be divided into families. Then families can be divided into genuses. In a genus, there are several different species, and there's only one of each species. When we name an organism, the first word in the organism's name, scientific name, is the genus name, and the second name is the species name. So for example, Melitopia digitata, our wow bug that we discussed, is in the genus Melitopia, which means there's other Melitopias, but there's only one Melitopia digitata. Digitata is the second name. That is the species name. So I'm going to take you through the different kingdoms, and we're going to start off with the fungi kingdom. So yeast, mold, mushrooms. We have the cordyceps fungi. We watched that gross video of the killer fungi attacking bugs. These are all in the fungi kingdom. So what do we know about fungi? So like plants, fungi do not move. Unlike plants and like animals, they can't make their own food. They don't have chloroplasts. They don't do photosynthesis. So if you can't move and you cannot make your own food, how do you eat? The fungi use these tiny tube-like structures called hyphae. The hyphae break down and absorb the food, and that is how most fungi get their nutrients. This makes them awesome decomposers. Decomposers break down organic matter and they return nutrients to the soil, and this helps the environment a lot by allowing the environment to recycle that matter. Most fungi reproduce by shooting spores, and we watched that video of the mushrooms sending out thousands and thousands of spores. And if the spores land in a condition that promotes fungi growth and survival, that fungi will then grow and develop into another mushroom. So we talked about two types of fungi in particular. We spent a lot of time learning about bread mold and yeast. So bread mold is a fungus that grows and feeds on bread. And when I have a piece of bread, I can't always see if mold is growing on it because most of the bread mold is clear. The black that we see in bread mold is the sporangia, which is the reproductive structure that hold the spores that allow this bread mold to reproduce. And we don't see the black right away because the reproductive structures don't grow until later. We also conducted an experiment to find out which type of bread molds faster, freshly baked or store-bought. And you should review this lab that is in your lab books. And we discussed what are the best conditions to allow bread mold to grow. We set up our own experiments, and what we found out was that freshly baked bread molds much faster than store-bought bread because the store-bought breads contain fungal inhibitors that inhibit or slow the growth of fungi, which allows the bread to have a longer shelf life. We also looked at yeast. Yeast are a very unique fungus because number one, they're unicellular, so unlike all of the other fungi, they only have one cell. Another thing that makes them really different from other fungi is that they don't have hyphae. So yeast are, again, very dissimilar to other types of fungi, especially bread molds. Molds and yeast, they are in the same kingdom, but that's it. They're not in the same phylum. They're actually not very closely related at all. Yeast, the way they eat is that they break down sugar and they release carbon dioxide into the environment. This process is called fermentation, and it's used in bread making and beer brewing. The yeast that when we opened our container of yeast, it didn't look like it was really alive. That's because when you buy yeast in the grocery store, it's dehydrated. It's not active. So it's still alive, but it's inactive. It can only be activated with warm water. So we developed an experiment to measure yeast activity, and what we did was we put sugar or different other substances into the warm water. We added yeast, and then we saw that how foam columns rose up when the yeast was releasing the CO2. So that's how we knew that the yeast was eating the substance, because it was releasing CO2, carbon dioxide, into the environment. I, again, strongly recommend that you review this lab and make sure you understand exactly what we did, why we did it, and how we did it, because that is going to be big on your final. Yeast also, they're different from bread molds and other types of fungi in that they reproduce by budding instead of shooting spores. So budding is a type of asexual reproduction that we have discussed other organisms bud as well, and when a yeast cell buds, a new cell grows onto the yeast cell and then breaks away and becomes its own yeast, and that is mainly how most yeast reproduce. So I hope this was helpful. I'm going to be posting some other videos that go through the other kingdoms and protists. So feel free to comment and to send me any emails if there's topics that you want covered or need help understanding. Bachrach@heartsower.org. All right, have a great day.